Story 1. Hey everyone, this took place in the summer of 2022, and I just never thought of writing down the story because I was so stunned that it happened to me. So every summer in my city, my friends and I like to make small campfires and chill secluded areas because we don't want to drive an hour to an actual campsite and pay any campsite fees to do so. These also happen pretty spontaneously, so it's a nice last minute hang to do. There's the one spot near my house that's located by a river that's really nice because no one usually goes there. The only thing to be worried about though are bears, because living in the Pacific Northwest is challenging like that, and my house specifically is located right next to mountains and forests. So one particular night at 11 p.m. I decide to go ahead of my friends and meet them at the spot and set things up early because I want us to be chilling once they all get there. This spot I get to has a 2-minute paved walkway I have to go through, and then I have to take a small trail ramping down the right side of the bridge that crosses over the river. Along this paved walkway are 2 lamps located at halfway and another at the start of the bridge / the ramp down to the campfire spot. I park my car at the beginning of the trail on the street and bring my campfire stuff like flashlight, lighter, small firewood, small shovel to dig out the pit, and whatever for else. I get to the spot and it's a small sandy beach kind of embankment on the side of the river with a small waiting area for toddlers with their families during hot summers. So I set up the chair and I get to digging the pit with only my flashlight illuminating where I'm digging. I'm also just shoveling the sand right next to me, nowhere near the water, but all of a sudden I hear a loud splash. I splash so loud that it can only come from something equally large like a 2-inch-sized rock. I'm confused because I swear I'm not throwing my sand into the water, even though I'm only a few feet away. I shine my flashlight at the water and I don't see anything. I kind of brush it off thinking I'm just hearing things, but as I keep shoveling a bit more I hear another loud splash. At this point I'm thinking something is falling from above because logically something must be falling into the water. I point the flashlight above where some trees are above the river and I don't see anything big enough to make the splash. So as I keep digging with my heart rate kind of going at this point, I hear a rustling past the arch of where the bridge goes over the river. I quickly grab my light and shine it towards where I heard the rustling. I call out hello. No response. In my head, if it was a bear I should be getting out of there immediately, but there was no bear or signs of anything for that matter. So I tell myself I'm just hearing things now because I've seen horror movies before and now my mind is playing tricks on me. But I hear the noise again and it clearly sounds like leaves being rustled. So I shine my flashlight over to the area again, and as I focus my eyes towards the illuminated area I see the naked back of a man hunched over. I was kind of frozen in anxiety and stress because honestly, of all the things I was to see, I didn't think I'd see the naked back of a man. From the quick analysis my brain could muster up, he looked to be mid-40s, shaved, not bald, and mediumish build, like a mix between chubby and built. As I had my flashlight staying on his back he started to stand up, and the first thing I noticed was that he wasn't wearing any pants either. My next reflex was to start packing up all my stuff and get the hell out of there, because now I'm piecing in my head that he must have been throwing things into the water to scare or shoo me away. So after using my reflexive deductive skills I proceeded to speed walk out of there with all of my stuff I'm carrying, all of my things with me, and briskly walk up to the small ramp, and I'm on the paved path now out of the forest. I can feel my heart beating in my chest, and I'm frequently looking back to make sure I'm not being followed. I'm in my Crocs, mind you, so I'm hoping that if I have to book it out of there I'd not regret being in sport mode from the get-go. I make it to the halfway point and a sense of relief starts setting in knowing I made it safely out of this very scary situation. But as I check behind me for the final time I see something slowly creeping over the ramp. Is the naked man crawling on all fours as if he was a primate walking. His head was positioned towards me, looking at me. As he made his way to the middle of the paved walkway he slowly gets up from his stance and starts standing on his feet and positions his body to face me. After setting himself into his new position the man starts running towards me. I book it. I run as hard as I can down the path. My flashlight jumped out of my pocket and I lost it, but I didn't care because of whole naked ass man was chasing me at 11 at night in a secluded forest. I looked back for a split second and the man was still running towards me, still completely naked. He could have my flashlight for all I care. I wanted to make it out of this situation alive. I Finally make it out of the forest, and I run to my car, which is only 30 feet away from the end of the forest. I desperately get into my car, and like a classic horror movie, I fumble with trying to get my key fob to unlock my car. I actually drop my keys and quickly think to myself, I'm actually dead, but I brush the th off and pick them back up. I get my fob, properly unlock the doors, and throw my things into my back seat before getting into my car. This felt like an eternity, but in hindsight it most likely took 6 seconds altogether as I try to guide my key into the ignition. I'm fixated on the end of the paved path that I was just at a few seconds ago, waiting to see if the naked man was still coming. I feel my key go into the ignition, and I switch my sights onto the road in front of me. I zoom out of the area as fast as possible as I drive away, and I'm a good 30 seconds from the location of the horror that just took place. I get a call on my phone. It was my friends calling me to ask me if I made it to the spot yet. And all I say to them is, guys, do I have a crazy story to tell you? They pull up to my house because, again, it was actually decently close to the campfire area, and I tell them the whole story the way I just told it. Now they swear that it was none of them trying to prank me or anything like that, and I also knew none of them would try to full sprint at me with it hanging out. But as we're just talking out in front of my house, there's a college student who looks like he's walking home that's going towards the direction of where I encountered the naked man. I just yelled out to him, yo, be careful, there's a naked guy that was chasing me by the bridge that crosses over the river. He responds saying, oh, damn, really? I got to go over that bridge to go home. All I tell him is good luck, man. The next day I reported it to the police by phone, but they sent over an officer so I could tell them in person and show them where in the area I saw these things. When we went to see where I initially saw the man's back hunched over, they said they didn't see any trace of anyone being there previously, but the officer said they would make note of it anyways in case it happens again. Some of my friends say it's a skinwalker, others say more realistically it's either a homeless mentally ill or a drunk SLH. Hires. One theory I've heard my friends say is that it's a future version of me pulling a prank on my past version. Because honestly, if time travel is real, I would totally screw with my younger self like that. So that is the only crazy let's not meet story I have, but damn, is it a story I will never forget. This is the story of a coworker I had. A story too long time ago, so I can look back on it and laugh now, but at the time it was really distressing for me. To give some context, every summer I would do some temp work for the company where my dad worked. It was an education company, so they always needed temp workers around July and August time for all of the exam remarks that they had come in. It was data entry work, but it suited me fine, and it meant I could earn a little extra cash while I was at university. I did this every summer from when I was about 19 right through to when I was 23, and then I got another job at the same company for a bit after I graduated, but we'll get onto that later. For now, all you need to know is that I was a reasonably familiar face there, and everyone knew I was my dad's daughter. The main downside of working there was that I'd clock off work at 5 p.m., but I'd have to wait for my dad to finish work since he was the head of an entire department, so he'd end up staying there a bit later every day. I'd bring a book with me and sit in this little foyer area between his department and the department where I worked. Since it had the most comfortable chairs, I must have been 22 years old when this happened, because it was the penultimate summer that I worked there. I had just had my hair cut short for the first time in my life, and I dyed it red as well. I was sitting on these couches reading when all of a sudden this guy approaches me. He tells me that he works in my dad's department, and he thought he'd come introduce himself. His name is Leon. This was a pretty common occurrence for me, and I was aware of this guy. He was young and decent looking, so a few of the women in my department had a crush on him. I was dating someone at the time though, and I'd never actually seen him in person, but I could see what they saw in him. We got to chat and he mentioned that I changed my hair, so I told him about cutting it short, and he cut me off mid-sentence. This is where it started to get weird. He said, no, first it was brown and you didn't have a fringe, then you went through a pH of curling it, then you put the fringe in and dyed it red. After that you dyed it purple. Now you've had it cut short and dyed it back to red. This guy I had just met was describing over 2 years worth of hairstyle changes that I'd had. I felt creeped out, but he seemed like a nice enough guy, and I guess I'd worked there at the company throughout the entire time, so it was reasonable to assume that he'd noticed me before. That should have been the first red flag. He asked me if I had Facebook, and I told him that I did. So he said he would add me. That seemed pretty normal, but then after he sent me The friend request he asked me to get my phone out so he could watch me accept the friend request. I'm British, and it's therefore impossible for me to be impolite, so I got out my phone and showed him that I had accepted it. I thought that might calm him down, but bear in mind he wasn't a battle-looking guy, so I felt a bit flattered at this point that he was so keen on me. That sense of flattery dissolved real fast after the Facebook thing. He kept asking me if I had MSN, and I told him that I didn't. I swear throughout this conversation, he asked me if I had MSN about 4 times. Then the final time he asked, he was like, "Please can you get MSN so we can chat after work?" It was like he had something really urgent he wanted to tell me, but I had only just met this person. I kind of laughed and said about how I hadn't used MSN since I was a teenager without necessarily rejecting him. Then he said something like, "Well, if you don't have MSN, then do you have Skype?" This seemed like the perfect opportunity to bring up my boyfriend, who was a foreign student and went back to his home country during the summer. He was the only person I spoke to on Skype. I said to Leon about how I didn't have my own Skype account, but I used my dad's Skype account to talk to my boyfriend. I really thought this might ward him off. I was wrong. Without missing a beat, he said, "Can you please just get your own Skype account so we can video chat after work?" He said it like I was somehow inconveniencing him, like this was something we'd agreed to months ago or something. I had no idea how to react, so I just sort of smiled and laughed. Thank the heavens someone from my dad's department walked past at that moment and was like, "Leon, aren't you meant to be at your desk?" He scurried off pretty quickly after that, but not before reminding me to get my own Skype account and send him the details. I told my dad about the whole exchange in the car ride home, but all he said was that Leon was very friendly and that a lot of women in his department liked him, so maybe I had just misunderstood the situation. I thought he was probably right, so I tried not to let it bother me. Later that evening, however, I was on my computer doing university work when a message popped up on my Facebook. It was Leon. All the message said was, "We like the same movies." I don't know what it was, but something about this message freaked me out so much I decided not to respond and logged off of Facebook, hoping that he wouldn't notice I'd been online. The next day after work, I was set in my usual spot when Leon comes over to me. His face was like thunder. At first I thought he was just having a bad day and was walking through the hallway, but my heart dropped when I realized he was walking directly towards me. "Why didn't you respond to my Facebook message?" I was stunned. How was I supposed to respond to that? Who says stuff like that in real life? Lucky for me, I didn't have an opportunity to respond because he started off on this tirade. I'm not even kidding. He started listing all of the movies we had in common that he'd seen on my Facebook profile: Batman, The Dark Knight, Watchmen, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, Fight Club. I just sat there watching him reel off all these film titles. Once he was finished, all he said was, "It's okay, I forgive you," and then walked off back to his department. Over the next couple of weeks, he came and found me in my spot every day and talked at me from the moment I sat down to the moment my dad came to get me. I don't remember many of the other exchanges, but I do remember distinctly one day pretending to pick my nose when I saw him coming to see if it would put him off. It didn't. It got to the point where I'd get so stressed out after work that I'd go and hide in the toilets for as long as I could, but the women I worked with started to notice and think that I was weird. Eventually I broached the subject with my dad, and he gave me his car keys after my sure so that I could go hide out in his car rather than in the building. So I'm camped out in his car, and I'm still feeling quite tense, but after about 20 minutes I start to feel at ease. Surely he won't come looking for me out here. Wrong. I look over at the main entrance and my heart drops. He's coming out of the door and he's scrutinizing all of the cars. I sank down as far as possible into my seat, but I wasn't fast enough, and he saw me. He comes rushing towards me and starts tapping on the glass, so I open the door and ask him, "What's up? I didn't see you in your usual spot, but luckily the doorman Chris told me he saw you come out here. Why are you in your dad's car again? What are you supposed to say to that?" I told him I had a headache, so I'd come out to the car to take some paracetamol and see if I could get some sleep. At least he respected that because he told me to feel better and then left me alone. I breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that I was only going to be working there for a few more days before I had to go back to university. I told my dad about the car incident, and he gave Leon a talking to. The next day, Leon would still come find me in the foyer, but he'd only talk to me for a few minutes in passing before leaving me alone. It was a big relief on My last day at work there, I was fully expecting him to do something crazy, but he didn't even come to chat with me that day. I left the office and thought I would never see him again. I found out he was fired not long after I left the company that year because he kept coming into work late and then spent most of his time at work chatting with his coworkers and me. Apparently fast forward to January of 2014, and I was preparing to move to China for a position teaching English. I had graduated from university and I was working at the same company, but this time in a semi-permanent capacity. It was my last day at work, so I received quite a few gifts and some fuss from my coworkers. It was about 10 a.m. when who should I see walk through the door but Leon. He had been hired as a temp to do the job that I'd done for so many years. As soon as he walked through the door, he saw me, and this flash of recognition crossed his face. I wanted to slide under my desk and die. He came walking over to me and was all smiles, asking about how I was and what I was still doing at the company. It was at this point that one of my coworkers mentioned about how I was off to China. Soon Leon seized on that and started talking about his friend who was also interested in TEFL. His interest seemed genuine, so I got to talking about how I got my TEL qualification, who I got it through, what company I was going to be working for out in China, and other stuff. We chatted for about 20 minutes and he wrote down some details for his friend, then went off to work. At the end of the day, I was packing all of my stuff to leave, and a few of my coworkers were coming over to say their goodbyes. Don't get me wrong, the Leon incident aside, I had a wonderful time working at that company, and I made a lot of great friends out of the corner of my eye. See Leon approaching, but I think what's the harm? He says goodbye and wishes me luck on my new adventure. Then as I'm literally walking out at the door of the department, I hear him call out, "See you in China," for the first 2 weeks of my teacher training. Over there, I was like a hawk, keeping a constant lookout for this guy. He never did follow me out to China, but it still remains as one of the creepiest encounters of my story. 3. Life during my early 20s, I worked as a meter reader in Iowa City, Iowa. A meter reader is the person who records how much electricity, gas, or water you used each month. If your meters are on the inside and you want an accurate bill, a meter reader must enter your home whether you're there to let them in or not. Entering a home when the owner isn't present is something that I've never gotten used to. No matter how loudly I knocked, I never shook the uneasy feeling that I wasn't welcome. The inside of a home is the ultimate private space. A home's exterior is just the image of ourselves that we project to the rest of the world, but the further you venture inside, the closer you come to truly seeing what kind of person lives there. And if you want the raw, unfiltered truth, head for the basement. I hate basements. I've seen walls that look like giant static filed TV screens until I realized it was roaches scurrying across a white background, cobwebs so thick and dusty that it looked like the cotton candy machine exploded at the Spider County Fair. I've seen rats, snakes, feces, weapons, neglected children, abused pets, homeless squatters, massive hordes, bizarre sexual items, a makeshift meth lab, and even a coffin. There are rational explanations for all of these things. Well, maybe not the coffin, but there was one basement where what I found was beyond the grasp of logic, and that's what made it so terrifying. It was an old apartment house. From the outside, it looked like every other house on the block. I entered the back door and found myself at the top of a staircase. I ran my hand along the wall until it grazed a light switch. I flipped the switch, but no lights turned on. I wasn't carrying a flashlight. My typical route involved 5 or 6 hours of walking, so I carried as little as possible. Often times I used the light from my handheld screen, but it only illuminated whatever was about a foot in front of it. So armed with the world's worst lantern, and I made my way down into the darkness. Once at the bottom, I blindly shuffled across the room, one baby step at a time, with arms outstretched and head down. I eventually reached the far side of the basement. I shined the dim light from my handheld along the wall and discovered 2 doors. Each door led into its own small room. I chose the door on the right and found the meters in the far corner. As I entered the reads, I began hearing noises coming from the other room. Something was moving, and it was whimpering that grew louder the longer I listened. I eventually realized it was a dog. It sounded weak and distressed. I tried to open the door, but it was locked. At this point, the dog was scratching on the other side of the door. I felt helpless. I reported it when I got back to the office, but I couldn't shake the thought of that dog I had stuck with me over the next month until it was time to return. So there I was 1 month later, Back within the basement, at least this time I knew where the meters were located. I shuffled back to the little room on the right, while keeping my ears open for any sounds coming from the other room. This time I heard nothing. I read the meters and started making my way back, but I couldn't shake the memory of that dog. Was it still trapped inside that room? My curiosity got the best of me. I stood outside the door for a few moments, listening. Still nothing. That's when I made a huge mistake. I tried to open the door. I had no more than jiggled the doorknob when I first heard its screams, blood-curdling screams unlike anything I'd ever heard, sounds that I didn't think a human was capable of producing. Short, high-pitched shrieks followed abruptly by a low, drawn-out guttural moan that ultimately morphed into something that I can only describe as crying, but much louder. It was all over the place, like some sort of psychotic free-form jazz. I stumbled backwards, nearly losing my balance. I shouted something like, "Hello, who's in there?" There was no response, just screams. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Still no response, just screams. There was no doubt that I yelled loud enough for him to hear me. He didn't want my help, he wanted me gone. I fumbled my way through the darkened room toward the exit. When I reached the top of the stairs, I just stood there, listening. I was trying to wrap my mind around what I was hearing. I waited for the screaming to stop, but it never did. When I finally left, it was still as loud and demented as when it began. I felt relieved, but that quickly vanished when I realized I had to do it all over again. The next month, I reported what I'd heard, but nothing came of it. As my return drew nearer, a sense of dread grew inside of me. What kind of lunatic sits alone in total darkness and silence? My mind created endless explanations for what kind of hell laid beyond that door. By the time I returned, I built him up in my mind so much that anyone other than the devil himself would have been a letdown, but there was no sign of him the next month, or even the next several months. I'd nearly given up on solving the mystery when a stroke of luck pulled me back in. One night, I went to a concert with my friend Laura. After the show, I gave her a ride home. She'd moved somewhat recently, so she had to give me directions. I didn't pay much attention to where she was leading me until she pointed to a house a ways of the street. I couldn't believe it. She'd moved into the house with the mysterious room in the basement. This sounds weird, but have you noticed anything odd about the basement? At this I began to ask, but before I could finish my sentence, she blurted out, "A crazy guy lives down there." Finally I had confirmation. She went on to tell me that even though her apartment was in the attic, she often heard him yelling late at night. But that wasn't all. She'd actually met him one day while walking to her car. She saw him standing in the lawn. He stood perfectly still with no expression on his face. He was directly in her path, so she cautiously made her way around him. She noticed he was staring at her, so she offered a friendly hi as she passed. He had no reaction except for one unsettling exception. He stuck out his tongue, then quickly sucked it back into his mouth and resumed acting like a statue, thoroughly creeped out. She got into her car and drove away. 2 or 3 months later, I finally met him. I entered the back door like I had so many months before. This time something was different. There was a light on in the basement. I peered down the staircase, and at the bottom a ragged-looking dog was staring back at me. It was the same dog I'd heard during my first visit. Then I noticed something behind the dog. I could see a pair of bare feet. The ceiling blocked my view of the rest of whoever was standing there, but it didn't matter. I knew it was him. I should have left right then, but I didn't. I know this probably doesn't make sense, but at this point my desire to finally get some answers outweighed my fear. I shakily called out, "Meter reader," and started to make my descent. As I made my way down, more of him was revealed. He looked to be middle-aged. His head was shaved and his eyes were wild. He was wearing pants, but no shirt. What I remembered most was how lean and sinewy his body looked. It had the look of a body that was never at rest. I explained who I was and what I was doing there. To my surprise, not only did he talk to me, but he actually sounded somewhat normal. The volume and pitch of his voice was odd, but he said the same sorts of things that people typically said to me. To readers, I even started to doubt whether or not he was the same man I'd heard screaming, but his behavior slowly removed all doubt as I read the meters. He rapidly paced back and forth. He was constantly wringing his hands together and cocking his head from side to side. The longer he talked, the more agitated he became grimacing, and little verbal tics started popping up in his speech. Every so often he'd blurt out out loud in the middle of a sentence. He Was trying to suppress these sounds, but he was losing the battle. I started to make my way to the exit. He followed. His verbal outbursts grew louder and more frequent. I was petrified. When I reached the stairs, I drew our conversation to an end and said goodbye. As I turned to head up the staircase, he could no longer hold it in. Screams, the very same unforgettable screams I'd heard coming from the locked room. I ran up the stairs as fast as my legs would carry me, flung the door open and rushed back into daylight. A month or two later, I had a couple of friends, including Laura, over at my place. I was excited to tell her about my encounter, but as I was relaying what happened, I could tell that something else was on her mind. When I finished telling my story, she told me something she'd seen a couple of weeks earlier. One day, she noticed lights flashing outside her window. She looked outside just in time to see police officers placing the man from the basement in the back seat of a squad car. She later found out from another tenant that he had attacked someone with a knife. That was the last we ever saw of him. I don't know what became of the man in the basement. I'd like to think he got the help he needed, but maybe that's just because I'd rather not think about the alternative. It was April of 2008. I was 20 and living in Denver for a year-long story for work contract with a non-profit in Boulder. My girlfriend, now wife, and my best friend Tim drove to Colorado from our home state to visit me for my 21st birthday. The non-profit I was working for housed their workers in dorm rooms, and drinking was not allowed on site, nor were visitors allowed to stay overnight, so I booked a hotel room in downtown Denver for the weekend where we could drink in honor of my 21st. The hotel was big, very nice, and in a safe central area of the city. So nice, in fact, that it was the same hotel that most of the politicians would stand during the DNC convention of '08 that took place in Denver later that summer. My wife and Tim arrived Saturday morning, and we all met up at the hotel. The day was fantastic. We drank across the city most of the day. By about 1 a.m. we got back to the hotel. The room was typical with two queen beds. Bed number 1 was close to a big window looking out across the city. Bed number 2 was pushed against the wall with a door that opened to the bathroom. You couldn't see the door/entryway to our room unless you were at the foot of bed number 1. We drank more and chatted in the room until about 4 a.m. My wife was laying at the head of bed number 2, flipping through the TV. Tim and I were seated at the foot of bed number 1, staring out the window as we talked. I heard some movement and the sound of a door opening. Without looking away from the window, I assumed it was my wife getting up to use the bathroom. A few minutes passed by and I thought I heard movement again, so I finally turned around to look. I saw my wife still lounging in bed number 2 as she had been. Did you get up a few minutes ago and use the bathroom? I asked her. No, she replied. I thought I heard a door. I said back to her with her heard, just looking confused back at me. Yeah, I thought I heard that too, Tim said, breaking his own gaze from the window. It was then I started to run cold and sobered up pretty quick. Very softly I heard Tim say, I think there's someone in our room. I lurched forward from the foot of the bed to look into the pitch-black entryway. I could barely make it out, and I wanted to believe I wasn't seeing it, but there was a man dressed in all black, with a black baseball cap pressed into the 90-degree corner of the entryway. Where the room door and wall met, absolute silence fell on the room, and it felt like hours passed by as I started to panic in my mind like no way I ever have in my entire life. We all knew we weren't alone and hadn't been for a while, and he knew we spotted him. Eventually, Tim got the courage to meekly speak in the direction of the entryway, and he said, "Hey man, is there something we can help you out with?" Another period of silence that felt like an eternity went by. He slumped off the edge of the wall a little into the light and made eye contact with Tim and I. We all just stared at each other. Then eventually he spoke up and said, "Is this room 1709? "No man, it's not," Tim said, stroking his beard nervously. He stared at us for a while longer, raising his eyebrows and shaking his head. He then turned around and laughed. We then erupted into a million curse words and paced around the room. I called the front desk. They told me that he was drunk and they found him in a stairwell, but they directed him back to the right room. Minutes later, Tim called the front desk and they told him he was not a guest. He was apprehended in the stairwell and taken into police custody. Then a while later they told my wife he disappeared and they had no idea who he was or what he was doing. They told her there wasn't even a room 1709 in the hotel. We got 3 different Stories we still have no idea what that was all about or how he managed to get a key card to our room. We were sure the door was closed. It was easily the most terrifying moment of my life. Always used the latch in hotel rooms. We got the stay refunded and about $200 in credit for food from the hotel. We should have sued, but we were young and dumb. Story 5. I still feel sick to my stomach, and I'm honestly so freaked out right now. I have every light in the house on. Anyway, here it goes. I volunteer for a 24/7 wildlife rescue service here in Australia that mostly amounts to picking up orphan joies from the side of the road, catching sick wallabies, and getting possums out of fireplaces, and others ranging from very challenging to the basic. Now I don't drive, so I only do rescues in my area or in the relative nearby suburbs. I live a block away from a wildlife reserve that has a problem with toxoplasmosis, a parasite that is basically deadly to most macropods. That's animals with pouches or marsupial. So when there was a call out at 9 p.m. in the reserve right next to me for a medium-sized wave with toxo, I had been bored all day on my day off and went, hell, why not? I got my rescue tub, which contains my essentials, and went on my way. The couple that called in the room were at the entrance of the trail, and they told me where it was. I knew them. Our dogs like to play together, and I was easily able to understand what part of the track they were talking about, and I trust them. They offered to come with me, but it was cold and late, and I didn't want to stress the little guy out by having so many people around. So I politely said no, and that I got this. My area is very safe, and I've had no problems walking out late at night or in the dark. So I walked the 30 minutes uphill into the reserve and found the poor waby. He was so lethargic he didn't bother to move when I went right up to him. Now, he was a very large wabe, definitely not a medium, and probably weighed around 45 kilograms, more than half my own body weight. I normally wouldn't do these rescues because I know it pushes my physical capabilities, so I gently maneuver him into the sack I had in the tub. I tie it with some cable ties and pop them in the tub. Now, having grown up in the area and in the Australian bush, I'm very used to the sounds of the animals in the night, the scratch, watching movements, hissing, growling, all that stuff. And since I had my head torch on the entire time so I could see where my feet were going, I was fine. You develop a sixth sense of sorts. I knew the sound so well. I was a nighttime bush tour guide a few years ago before I got sick, and when I get a hair-raising feeling on the back of my neck, I know something isn't right, and it's sure as sure every hair on my body seemed to stand on end. I'm on the balls of my feet. I scan the surrounding area thinking it might be a snake or a lost dog or something. Nothing, confused but still trusting my gut, and I slowly start to travel back down the trail. The wave is too heavy. I have to stop every few meters and put it down to stop the tub from cutting my hands. Then there was a large crack and movement to my rear left. I spin around and start internally freaking out. That was no animal sound. I knew it had to be a person. It was way too big, and there was sudden silence, like whatever had made the noise, it stopped or was stalking. I decided to just it. I pulled on my gloves, hoisted the wave over my back, turned off my light, and started booking it down the trail, sticking to the right side just along the edge of the trees, leaving my tub behind. I doubt anyone would take it, and honestly I was freaking out so much I couldn't give a. Luckily it was mostly downhill, so I got there in maybe 20 minutes or so. Every now and then I could hear a distinctive rustle or crunching of dead bark on the ground that was way too big for any animal in my area, let alone one that would follow a human the entire time. My instincts are screaming to run. I was gripping the bag over my shoulder for dear life and didn't even stop when my shoulder was screaming to stop. In rest, I made it out and down several streets, well into the tight-knit neighborhood and into the light. Before I dared stop, I couldn't bring myself to look over my shoulder. I could feel someone watching me. I started to cry as I made my way home, only a few streets away. I told my mom, and she looked very worried and lightly scolded me for going out like that, even though we have both done this kind of thing before. I called up my best friend, and she came over for the night, and the next day she came with me to try and find my rescue tub. This morning another rescuer came to take the sick route to the vet, and me and Risa went back up to the bush. We found it. The heavy-duty plastic tub had been smashed up, like someone kept jumping on it. It was half intact. There were butts of what I could only assume were rolled cigarettes and a needle. I just silently picked up my broken tub and threw it away when I got home. I don't think I'll be going out at night for a long While I hope you enjoyed that, guys, if you have a scary story you would like me to read in an upcoming video, this is one way to help me guarantee variety in the stories I share. You can email me or post it to my subreddit. I'll drop the details in the video description. Thank you all for listening, and a special thanks to my patrons and channel members who now have early access to Adri videos as well as other behind-the-scenes content. Thank you to Michelle and Kevin, Amanda and Rebecca, Morris, Yennefer, Jessica, Leigh, Brock, Ballard, Kim Thompson, Angela Reeves, Sure, AGI, Nathan, Shadwick, Nicholas Johnson, Samantha Place, Cheryl Duckworth, Scout Mom 405, Z Harris, Unladylike 13, Ventura, California, Elizabeth Mayer, Alexia Tuttle, Marshana Rainey, Wells upon Mary Wright, Jessica Copperfield, Zoe D, Danielle Shaw, Jane Wiggins, Tara Harris, Mary Rye Callie, Townsend M, Deshawn Edmondson, Kimmy L, Wendy, Maris Confessions of a Cleaner, Megan Abrams, Miss Tycoon, Stephen Sloan, Christina Myway, Ashley B.R. Mattis, Afelter, Danielle, Tina Marie, Heckman, Amal Garner, Lisa Redford, Deborah Malakani, Sue T. Adwell, Diana Johnston, Vampy Debs, Jasmine Davis, Erica Air Fox, Mulder Ram, Beltron, Tina, Nick Bigoski, Sarah C.H., Neil Kavanaugh, Tiara Sunders, Timothy Stratton, Jennifer Jenkins, LYD, Rash Maribel, Deluna Michael, Al, Ollie Marissa, Kuro Amber, Hops King, Slim Justin, Beast Gillespie, Joy, Dana, J. Blee, Anna, Stephanie McLaren, Lumine, Kami, Skin Crawler, Adarabella, Place 2006, Michelle Welchman, Dana B., Lisa McDonald, Clary, Scott Madison, C. Wasp, Sting, Jennifer J., Ashley Liliat, Lee T. Wyatt, Gina Laura, JK6, Venzio, Donna, Joey Big, GSC, Tanya, Spaghetti, Wyolo King, Matthew, October Gypsy, Lisa, Ollie TH, Build With Me, Letitia, Fran Debs, Insomnic, Kat, Stephanie Summer, Rebecca, Tyara This, Bad Kitty, Your Pay Piece, Dilly Laney, Tripping Balls Through History, Samantha, Erica, Alyssa, Tracy Killians, Place, April, James Earn, Jay-Z Joy, Handout, Pegasus Genesis, Karen, Kitu V, Barry LJ, Fiona Xbox, Scal, I Like, Booty Monica, Level A Chris and Donna, Holly Spry, Kimber, Jasmine, Centik, Heather Haven, Kitty Cat, Luna 2, ADHD, Aurora Jan, Cinderella, Baby, Borderline, Betty, Lady Draco, Erica, Nicole, Snowball, Rena, Melanie, The Honeybee 987, Pretty Girl 215, Ryan Brook, Wendy CFTY, Kel, Tina Dina, Vampy Debs, Patricia Amber, Krista Brenda, Absent Al, Chrissy K, Spiders Web, H. Lala, Andrea Sue, Monique Shaw, Gorman, Emma, Lisa, Sigma Cube, X. Greg, Chelsea, Amanda, Jane, Sam, Zepte, Sarah C, Austin, Tegan, Lil, Smart, Jenny,